The dust road to Mercy. The road to Mercy Creek was long, dry, and cruel. Dust curled up around their torn hems like ghosts, clinging to the faded lace of two wedding gowns that had once been white. Now they were the color of ash. Clara Wynn's steps faltered every few yards, her lips cracked and pale. Beside her, Maribel Cross steadied her with a hand that trembled, not from fear, but from hunger. 3 days had passed since they'd eaten. Behind them lay the smoldering remains of everything they had trusted. The church that never finished their vows, the men who never meant their promises, and the town that watched their shame with folded arms. Ahead stretched the unending dust of the western plains. Clara broke the silence first, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Do you think they're still looking for us?" Maribel laughed once, sharp and bitter. "Men like them don't chase what they've already ruined." It had been meant as comfort, but it fell between them like a knife. Clara turned away, clutching something in her palm, a pair of silver rings, still gleaming faintly despite the grime. They had offered these rings to men who'd sworn devotion and received betrayal in return. By the third sunset, they stumbled across the valley that locals called the Land of Mercy, though no mercy seemed to dwell there. Rolling fields stretched beneath a sky bruised purple with dusk, and in the far distance, a lone farmhouse crouched beneath a windmill. A horse's silhouette cut across the horizon, followed by the shadow of a man, broad, deliberate, and immense. "Maribel," Clara breathed. "Someone's there." Maribel narrowed her eyes, weary but alert. "If he's got bread, he's got my faith." They followed the faint trail toward the figure. The wind picked up, whipping at their hair, carrying the scent of dry hay and distant rain. As they drew near, the man turned, revealing eyes the color of river mud and a beard touched by silver. His name, they would later learn, was Elias Grant, but in that moment he was only a stranger with the stature of a myth. Part man, part storm. He said nothing at first, just studied them as though trying to decide if they were real or ghosts conjured by the dying light. His voice, when it came, was deep and cautious. "You two lost." Maribel stepped forward, chin lifted in defiance. "We're not lost, just done walking." She glanced at Clara. "We haven't eaten in 3 days. Would you buy our wedding rings?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Elias's gaze dropped to the trembling hands that held out the silver bands. The sight seemed to wound him. He looked away toward the barn, then back to them, his jaw tight. "I don't buy love," he said quietly, "but I can offer supper." He turned, motioning toward the house. Maribel hesitated, suspicion flickering behind her exhaustion, but Clara touched her arm gently. "Please," she whispered, "we can't walk anymore." The farmhouse door creaked open, releasing a faint glow of lantern light. Inside smelled of bread, old wood, and the faint memory of rain. Elias moved with a quiet precision, ladling stew into tin bowls. The women sat opposite him, their shoulders brushing, their bodies taut, as if expecting the offer of kindness to vanish at any moment. "Your brides," Elias finally said, nodding to their dresses. "Were," Maribel corrected. "The weddings didn't last as long as the vows." He gave a small grunt, neither prying nor judging. Clara studied him across the table. His hands were rough, knuckle-scarred, the hands of someone who had worked hard enough to forget. Yet his movements carried a kind of gentleness she hadn't seen in months. Elias ate little, mostly watching them with the quiet curiosity of a man who had forgotten how to speak to people. "You'll stay the night," he said at last. "The wind's turning. Tomorrow, I'll point you toward town." Maribel opened her mouth to refuse, pride flaring, but Clara spoke first. "Thank you." The words trembled with relief, and something else, something like the fragile beginning of trust. As night settled over the ranch, the two brides lay on a small cot near the hearth. The storm outside began to moan through the eaves, rattling the window panes. In the dim light, Clara watched Elias moving about the room, extinguishing lamps, stacking wood, never once glancing their way. Maribel whispered, "You think he's kind, don't you?" Clara didn't answer. She wasn't sure, but there was something in the way he carried his silence, as if it were a burden, not a weapon. When the final lamp went out, the only sound was the fire's soft crackle. The scent of stew lingered, rich and comforting. Clara closed her eyes, for the first time in days, feeling the weight of exhaustion give way to something gentler. Safety, perhaps, or hope. Outside, thunder rolled over the plains. The storm's edge brushed the farmhouse walls like a warning. But inside, beneath the flicker of dying embers, 3 lives had already begun to tangle in ways none of them could yet see. And though neither bride knew it, the man who had offered them supper would soon become the reason their vows, broken and buried, found new meaning in betrayal, bread, fire, and temptation. Morning arrived quietly, breaking over the fields in a pale gold haze. The storm had passed, leaving the earth damp and clean. From the window, Clara watched the sunlight crawl across the kitchen floorboards like a hesitant visitor. She could hear Elias outside, his boots crunching through wet soil as he fed the horses. Each movement of his seemed deliberate, as if weighed by invisible sorrow. Maribel sat at the table, tearing small pieces of leftover bread and watching Clara with unreadable eyes. "You're thinking about him," she said flatly. Clara turned. "I'm thinking about surviving." Maribel smirked, but her voice softened. "You always mistake hunger for virtue." She leaned back, studying her companion. "The man saved our lives, but that doesn't mean he won't want something in return." Before Clara could respond, the door opened. Elias stepped in, carrying a faint chill with him. His shirt was damp, clinging to the broad shape of his shoulders. He nodded a silent greeting and set down a basket of fresh eggs. The smell of rain clung to his skin. "Breakfast," he said simply. They ate together in half-silence, the rhythm of chewing and clinking spoons filling the void where conversation should have been. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable, it was watchful. Elias's eyes would drift, almost unconsciously, toward Clara. She noticed, though she pretended not to. Maribel noticed too, and her jaw tightened each time. After the meal, Elias rose to leave. "There's work needs doing," he said. "If you're to stay until town, you can earn your keep." "Maribel, the barn could use sorting." "Clara, help me in the garden." It wasn't a request. It was structure, something they hadn't known in weeks. Outside, the morning air was heavy with moisture. Rows of half-tilled earth stretched ahead, gleaming dark under the sun. Clara knelt beside Elias, her hands sinking into the soil. She found herself listening to the quiet rhythm of his breath, the scrape of his shovel, the low hum he made as he worked. "You live out here alone?" she asked finally. "Mostly," he said. "Wasn't always that way." She waited, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he gestured toward the field. "Ground doesn't ask questions. It just takes what you give and gives back what it can. That's enough for me." Something in his tone carried the weight of confession. Clara nodded, unsure how to respond, but feeling oddly understood. Her life had been filled with words, empty ones, spoken by men who vowed love like they were trading favors. Elias, with his silence, said more than any of them ever had. Hours passed. When the sun sank low, they returned to the house, dirt-streaked and aching. Maribel waited by the door, her expression sharp. "Looks like you two found plenty to talk about," she said, her voice honeyed and hard. Clara flushed. "Don't start." "Start what?" "I'm only saying, men like him, they smell weakness. You think he's gentle because he's quiet? You'll learn." Elias stepped inside behind Clara. "You speak bold for a guest," he said calmly. Maribel turned to him, defiance flashing in her eyes. "And you play saint for a man who keeps 2 women under his roof. What does that make you?" The silence that followed was sharp as glass. Then Elias said, "It makes me someone who doesn't throw starving people into the rain." Maribel's shoulders stiffened. She muttered something under her breath and stormed into the other room. Clara stood there, caught between gratitude and shame. "She doesn't mean it," she said quietly. Elias looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe she does. Doesn't make her wrong." As he turned away, Clara felt something twist at her chest, something fragile and dangerous. That evening, as the wind rose again, the 3 of them found themselves gathered near the hearth. The storm outside had returned, gentler this time, brushing against the windows like a restless spirit. Elias stoked the fire, his large hands surprisingly careful with the thin kindling. Maribel sat across the room, eyes fixed on the flames. Her bitterness had cooled into silence. Clara could feel the tension between them like a drawn wire. When Elias offered a second blanket, Clara took it. Their fingers touched briefly, just a spark of warmth in the cold air. But the moment seemed to stretch, charged with something unspoken. She looked up at him, and for an instant his gaze held hers, steady and searching. Then he looked away. The firelight danced across his face, softening the hard lines etched by years of solitude. Clara studied him, wondering what wound had made him so kind yet so withdrawn. Maribel's voice broke the silence. "We'll leave tomorrow." Elias didn't argue. He only nodded, though something in his eyes dimmed. Clara wanted to speak, to say thank you, to ask to stay longer, but the words tangled in her throat. When the house finally grew quiet, she lay awake, listening to the wind sweep over the fields. Somewhere in the darkness, Elias moved through the hallway, his steps slow, his breathing heavy with thought. Clara closed her eyes, clutching the silver rings she still kept hidden in her dress pocket. The metal felt cold against her skin, a reminder of promises shattered and the strange warmth now threatening to replace them. Outside, rain began again, soft and steady. Inside, 3 hearts beat beneath one roof, each keeping secrets that would soon tear the fragile peace apart. And as the fire dimmed to embers, hunger, of a different kind, stirred quietly in the dark. The sin beneath warmth. The morning after the second storm broke with a fragile calm. Mist hung low over the fields, softening the horizon into shades of silver and pale blue. Clara rose early, restless, the echo of rain still clinging to her thoughts. Maribel was asleep, one arm flung across the cot, her expression hard even in dreams. Clara slipped quietly from the room, seeking air, or perhaps distance. Elias was already outside, splitting wood by the barn. Each swing of the axe struck like a heartbeat, steady and unhurried. When he noticed her watching, he paused, resting on the handle. "You don't sleep much," he said. "I dream too loudly," she replied. He gave a faint smile, then motioned toward the pile of kindling. "Hand me that stack, if you'd rather work than think." Clara obeyed, the early light catching in her hair as she moved. There was no conversation after that, just the rhythm of shared labor, 2 people bound by silence, and something unspoken beneath it. When the task was done, Elias offered her water from his canteen. Their hands brushed, a brief contact that carried an almost electric awareness. Clara felt it linger, unwanted yet undeniable. She took a slow breath, but the air felt heavy. "You ever plan to go back?" he asked finally. She shook her head. "There's nothing left there." Elias nodded. "I know that feeling." His voice dropped, rough as gravel. "You think leaving fixes it. But ghosts don't care about distance." Something in his tone made her look up. There was an ache behind his eyes, a loneliness she recognized too well. It pulled at her, an understanding that felt dangerously close to intimacy. Before she could respond, Maribel's voice cut through the air behind them. "Clara!" Inside now, Clara turned, startled by the sharpness in her tone. Maribel stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes dark with suspicion. The scene between Clara and Elias, though innocent in motion, looked like something else from afar. 2 figures standing too close, breathing the same air. Back inside, the tension thickened. Maribel's anger simmered, unspoken at first. She waited until Elias left to the stables before she spoke. "You think I can't see it?" she hissed. "The way you look at him." Clara blinked, shocked. "Maribel, don't lie. You forget how well I know you. I've seen that look before, back when you swore you'd never trust another man again." Clara's throat tightened. "It isn't like that." "Then what is it? Gratitude? Pity? Or do you just need someone new to save you?" The words struck deep. Clara turned away, her chest trembling. "You think this is easy for me? After everything? I didn't ask to feel anything." Maribel stepped closer, her voice cracking under the weight of jealousy and fear. "But you do feel something. That's the problem." Neither spoke for a long time after. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows like a warning. By afternoon, the air had grown warm again. Elias returned to the house, unaware of the storm brewing inside. He offered to help prepare supper, but the room felt charged, every gesture watched. Maribel's silence had sharpened into bitterness. Clara busied herself with the fire, but her hands trembled as she stirred the pot. Elias's presence behind her was grounding, yet unbearable. When she turned slightly, her shoulder brushed his chest, an accidental touch that froze them both. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she stepped away too quickly, knocking a cup from the counter. It shattered. Elias bent to pick it up, but Maribel's voice cut through the stillness. "Leave it," she said coldly. "Seems we're breaking plenty around here already." Elias straightened, his expression unreadable. "I'll be outside," he said, and left without another word. The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara sank to her knees, gathering the shards. Her reflection fractured across the pieces, her own face broken and multiplied. That evening, guilt sat heavy on her chest. She found herself watching Elias through the window, his silhouette framed by the last glow of sunset. He sat near the barn, shoulders bowed, the weight of solitude pressing down on him. Something inside her gave way, not desire at first, but a desperate need to be seen, to be understood. When she stepped outside, the air was thick with the scent of rain and wood smoke. Elias didn't look up until she spoke. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He set down the lantern slowly. "For what?" "For wanting something I shouldn't." He looked at her then, really looked, and in his gaze she saw not judgment but recognition. The same hunger mirrored back, shaped by years of silence. "You're not the only one," he said quietly. The distance between them vanished before she realized she'd moved. His hands found her shoulders, her breath caught. There were no words, just the sound of rain returning, gentle but relentless. What happened next unfolded not in passion, but in surrender, two broken people mistaking warmth for absolution. When it was over, silence reclaimed them. Elias turned away first, guilt written in the slant of his shoulders. Clara stood in the doorway, shaking. The lantern's light flickered across her ringless hand. From the window above, unseen, Maribel watched, her face pale as the moonlight that fell across it. She pressed her fingers to her lips, as if to stifle the sound of something breaking inside her. The rain deepened, washing the dust from the fields, but not the shame that clung to the farmhouse walls. Inside, the fire sputtered low, its glow trembling like a secret struggling to stay alive. And somewhere between breath and silence, the promise of peace died, quietly, completely, and without witness. Ashes and forgiveness. The storm passed in the night, leaving the world washed clean and hollow. Morning light spilled through the farmhouse windows, thin and colorless, tracing the outlines of what remained. Two empty bowls on the table, a damp shawl draped over a chair, and silence. Heavy, deliberate silence. Clara sat by the hearth, her fingers twisting the hem of her skirt. The fire had gone out hours ago, but she hadn't moved to relight it. The warmth that had once filled the house now existed only in memory, tainted and thin. She could still feel the echo of Elias's touch, still see the look in Maribel's eyes when the truth had been laid bare, not by confession, but by the cruel mercy of chance. Elias entered quietly, his boots dragging faint mud across the floorboards. He looked older than he had the day before, as if guilt had carved deeper lines into his face overnight. "She's gone," he said. Clara's head lifted, but she already knew. The other cot was empty, the few belongings Maribel had brought gone. Wynn, before dawn, took one of the horses. Clara pressed her hands to her mouth, trying to breathe past the rising panic. "I didn't mean for her." "I know," Elias interrupted gently. "Doesn't make it right." The words landed between them like stones. For a long while, neither spoke. The world outside had grown still, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and fading storm. Clara finally rose, her body stiff, her resolve trembling but intact. I have to find her. Elias looked toward the door, then back at her. She may not want to be found. She's all I have left, Clara whispered. Even if she hates me. He nodded, slow and weary, then reached into his coat pocket. Here. He placed the 2 silver rings in her hand, the same rings she had once tried to sell for bread. You'll need something to remind her who you were before all this. Clara stared at them, light glinting off the metal. Symbols of promises broken, now offered as a chance to make one last one right. Thank you, she murmured, the words barely holding. Elias's expression softened. You should go while the light's good. The trail won't stay clear. She hesitated, wanting to say more, to offer some apology that could make sense of what had passed between them. But nothing she could say would matter now, so she only nodded and left. The road was slick with rain, the fields quiet except for the distant caw of crows. Clara walked for miles, her boots sinking into the soft earth. Each step carried her deeper into reflection. On hunger, on love, on the strange cruelty of being human. She had thought survival was the hardest part, but it wasn't. It was living afterward, knowing what line she had crossed. By midday, she reached the edge of a nearby town, a small cluster of buildings around a church and a general store. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and wood smoke. She asked after Maribel, showing a faded sketch she'd drawn in the dirt. One of the shopkeepers pointed toward the chapel. Inside, sunlight fell through stained glass, scattering fragments of color across the floor. And there, kneeling near the front, was Maribel. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, her wedding dress now reduced to a ghostly ruin. She didn't turn when Clara entered. Clara took a slow breath, the rings clutched tight in her hand. Her voice came out soft, almost childlike. Maribel. Maribel didn't move. You shouldn't have come. I had to. Clara stepped closer. You were right. I let my hunger become something else. I hurt you. Maribel's shoulders tensed, but she didn't rise. You didn't just hurt me, Clara. You broke the only thing that still felt pure. Clara knelt beside her, placing the rings on the wooden pew. These were supposed to mean forever. Now, they just remind me that I didn't understand what forever costs. For a moment, the only sound was the faint creak of the church rafters. Then Maribel turned, her eyes red, but no longer furious, just tired. You think forgiveness is that simple? She asked. No, Clara said. I think it's the only thing left worth trying. Something fragile passed between them, an understanding not of absolution, but of shared pain. Maribel reached out, brushing her fingers against the cold metal rings. Then, with a sigh, she slid one across the pew toward Clara. Keep it, she said, not as a promise, as a reminder. Clara took it, tears catching in her throat. They sat in silence for a long time, the sunlight shifting across the floor, painting them both in gold. When Clara finally returned to the farm that evening, the sky was streaked with crimson. Elias was out by the fields, mending a broken fence. He looked up as she approached. She's safe, Clara said simply, and she forgave me enough. He nodded once, the faintest relief flickering in his eyes. That's something. She watched him work for a moment, then said quietly, I'll leave tomorrow. Mercy Creek isn't my place. Elias didn't stop her. It's not mine either, he said. Just where I ended up. A small, sad smile touched her lips. Then maybe that's what we both are, people who ended up somewhere they didn't mean to. He met her gaze, the weight of everything they'd shared. Kindness, guilt, and unspoken longing, passing between them one last time. As the sun sank, Clara turned toward the horizon, the silver ring glinting faintly on her finger. The world ahead was uncertain, but at least it was hers again. Behind her, the farmhouse stood still against the darkening sky, smoke curling from its chimney like a final prayer. And the narrator's voice, soft and low, closed the story. Some loves are not meant to last. They come to teach us what hunger truly means, where mercy begins, and where it ends.